Hello and welcome everybody. On tonight's show, we are here with Jonathan Nevair at Space Cowboy Books Online to celebrate his latest novel, Stellar Instinct, which is a stellar spy-fi science fiction space opera thriller. Jonathan Nevair is a fiction writer and, as Dr. Jonathan Wallace, an art historian and professor of art history at Moore College of Art and Design, Philadelphia. After 2 decades of academic training in publishing, he finally got up the nerve to write fiction. Thank God. Jonathan grew up on Long Island, New York, but now resides in Southeast Pennsylvania with his wife and rambunctious mountain feist, Cricket. You can find more information about him at his website, which I will throw a link to in the chat in a moment, as well as a link to Stellar Instinct. I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Nevair to do a reading, and then we will get into the interview and Q&A section. If you have any questions while he's reading, please feel free to drop those in the chat, and we will get to those at the end of the program. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Jean Paul, and thanks for having me back. It's always awesome to be at Space Cowboy. So I'm going to do a very short reading from chapter 4, actually, of Stellar Instinct. And this is actually at the headquarters of the agency, which is GAMOPS. And it is the first interaction with Agent Lelaine Renault and her boss, Asher Loudon. Lelaine sat in the familiar wooden chair across Asher Loudon's desk, her finger tracing invisible lines on the polished surface. The GAMOPS director stood, sipping tea by his office window, listening to her report through an audio translation feed in his earpiece. Lingering traces of Queen Yaz flake, Loudon's pipe tobacco of choice, hung in the air like morning mist. The tantalizing scent teased her nostrils, conjuring potent and nostalgic memories. Her parents socializing with friends while she watched from a makeshift play area or listened from her second-floor bedroom. So many nights lulled to sleep by the rise and fall of laughter, like gentle waves on a shoreline. She could almost feel the comfy sheets, tinged with the scent of tobacco, as she gazed at Fentari's moons through the skylight. Yaz Flake was embedded in her DNA. The olfactory trigger pulled back a curtain on the first act of her life. The leaf's thick and elegant smoke painted an image of good times before a crisis intervened and left her parentless and in the care of Granny Kissy, when she wasn't off saving the galaxy from the clutches of criminal masterminds. Lelaine stared at the sinuous trail of gray smoke rising from the discarded pipe on the desk. In its austere stand of Bartus marble, the wide bowl and curved stem offered a distraction from the tension Loudon thrived on in moments like these. Writing reports was bad enough, but being present while her boss listened to them was pure torture. The poetry rose, as it always did when her emotions vied for dominance. Both arrogant and stern, I think it gets you off. Because of your, and then what happened? Loudon knocked back the last of his tea and placed the cup and saucer down on a circular table. He didn't rotate to face her, instead, choosing to keep his back turned. That was never a good sign. The GAMOPS director's tall and gaunt figure cut into the rays of warm sunlight penetrating the dimly lit interior. It vanished, she said, and the cavern collapsed. I was lucky to get out alive. Loudon turned. All she made out in the strong backlight of the morning sun was his cravat and socks, both stark white and glittering. The rest of him, the prominent beak-like nose, austere and expertly tailored gray suit, and idiosyncratic translucent skin typical of all Gezji, were lost in shadow. That was Asher Loudon, CEO of the most powerful organization that didn't exist in the eyes of billions under its protection. His leadership cast an invisible, regulatory blanket over the known world, keeping it safe like a galactic watchdog. And you say it tried to feed on your thoughts? As best I can describe it. Lelaine shifted in her seat, adjusting a leg. Her knee still ached. And did it? Sir? She looked at his silhouette. Loudon's face was nothing more than an oblong void. He was doing it on purpose. Did it communicate with you? Speak with you? Lelaine stared at the shadow. Faint traces of air traffic dotted the sky lanes out the window. The endlessly repeating trails of morning commuters appeared like an army of insects on the move. Did it communicate with me? The traumatic confrontation with the thing on Frebu stirred her insides. T8? I don't think so, sir, no, she said, snapping back to the urban world of Tavi Prime. You aren't sure? She knew where this was going. The scent of doubt and skepticism was usurping the Queen Yaz flake. I'm reporting what happened, sir, as accurately as I can, and in this case, that means being unsure. GAMOPS protocol requires. Loudon held up a hand, signaling for her to halt. You know what I'm getting at. He strode back to his desk and sat. The shadowy silhouette metamorphosed into a visible, tangible humanoid now that he was out of the backlighting. One who, by the look Lillian recognized on his face, was about to say something insensitive. Let's play hypotheticals, shall we? Loudon placed his elbows on the desk and clasped his fingertips together under his chin. The director's milky skin revealed faint traces of nerves and muscles, a reminder that the Gejti species once thrived on a planet in near darkness millions of cycles ago. Loudon's eyes, pitch as night, cast their cold gaze across the desk. The pair of respiratory gills on either side of his neck, replacing the nasal passageway of humans, rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Scenario 1, Loudon said. This thing is some sort of alien entity. Scenario 2, you encountered a new weapon, made by whomever it is who might be busy causing unknown radio signals on these far-off Arctic planets. Scenario 3, you had an episode of some, with all due respect, be quiet. Loudon's calm austerity hit like a laser. You had an episode of some kind, he said, continuing, brought on by overworking yourself and stress, or Loudon was doing that thing he did when he raised one of his black eyebrows. On his long, narrow face with its elderly statesman air, the gesture was effective. As much as she hated to admit it, it was a good look. It said, I am now being reasonable. Or, he repeated, something out there triggered a neurological event or hallucination. The hyperchromium fumes, perhaps? Oh, crap. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility. Her mind backtracked, running at high speed through the events on Frebu after she gutted the Nandari. She'd had inhaled a good bit of the noxious smoke. And I tossed the entire jacket into the flames right before it appeared. That doesn't explain the fire going out, sir, she said. Loudon did the other thing he liked to employ when she spoke with arrogance. Lillian and the other T-number agents referred to it as the thing with his hand, a gesture where he turned his palm up and over in the air. Her boss made the action and waited for her response. It did happen, sir. Did it? It had to have. I'm sure of it, she said, pushing back. There's no way that could be. A buzzer sounded, interrupting her defense. Yes, Loudon said. Sir, I've got the images downloaded and processed from T8's blaster capture. The voice was Carbrooks. He'd be in the lab. Perfect timing. The pictures from when she tore out of the collapsing ice cave would provide the visual evidence for her report. And, Loudon said, the calm voice of his gaze locked on her. Nothing there. You've got to be kidding. I mean, there's the glacial cavern and pattern cracks and whatnot, Carbrooks said, but no sign of anything in the ice. And IR scans on the data aren't bringing up anything either. Even my brand new multispectral resonator doesn't provide anything. Thank you, Carbrook. Loudon cut the line and leaned back in his chair. You didn't see any signs of an installation or any kind of facility? He was doing the I'm being reasonable thing again. No, nothing else, Lillian said. As my report stated, my effort to reach the pulse coordinates was compromised when the Dendari turned on me. Right, I'm putting you on psych leave for a week. What? Loudon's face didn't flinch. The cravat sparkled, but his face remained earnest. Even the visible nerves and cheek muscles were still. Only his temple arteries pulsed as they always did in a steady rhythm. You don't believe me? I don't want you on active duty until you've been checked out by Dr. Zeglow. The psych evaluator? In all her time at GAMUPS, Loudon had never pulled her from a lead, even one as strange as this. Something is happening on Frebu, sir, and probably in the other systems we're watching. We have to get back out there. Agreed. I'm sending T3 to give it a twice-over. Alana? She's a Pertani thug. Searches and subtlety aren't her specialty. She's too thick-headed and brutish to know what to look for. This is my lead. With all due respect, you're off Operation Snow Eclipse. I'll have my assistant set up an appointment with Dr. Zeglow, day after tomorrow. Whether this was an episode of some kind or an anomaly, like you say, episode, end of conversation. Loudon swiped a hand over a sensor bar on his desk, a thin hollow field displaying a region of space Lillian didn't recognize, dense with star systems, rose between their faces. She peered through the opening between the glowing orbit lines. Her boss had moved his attention to the hollow field. Arrogant bastard.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was an excerpt from Stellar Instinct. So after debuting with a space opera trilogy, what made you decide to want a spy-fi thriller, to write a spy-fi thriller? It's still a space opera, of course, but that's quite a shift of gears. What prompted you to do that? What in your life or your reading or the challenges that you wanted to put on yourself as a writer led you to do that?
Yeah, I think you know, the trilogy, the Windtide trilogy, was a really earnest set of books, and the story was rigorous in terms of, you know, kind of the layers that went into it. There was a lot of ethics in there. There was a lot of sort of deep thinking on my part in having to do that series. And I think I was a little bit at that point exhausted in terms of the kind of output that I had to do to write those 3 books. And for my own self, I wanted to write something fun, and I wanted to write something that was lighter. And so the spy-fi thing seemed like a great route to go. The other thing about it is I love spies and secret agents. I have always loved spies and secret agents. It's funny, when I looked at my bookshelf not too long ago, I noticed something that I never really picked up on. There's a good amount of spy thrillers and just general thrillers in my collection. And the most books that I really have are space-based science fiction and fantasy and spy thrillers. And so, you know, I just kind of decided this is a great opportunity for me to put the 2 of these things together. I didn't have to do a lot of research on the spy side of things. All the secret agent tropes were really familiar to me. I've seen sort of every single, you know, 80s and 90s secret agent movie that's out there. Read a lot of the classic secret agent books. So that kind of fell right into place. And the only thing I really needed to do was educate myself on the thriller as a kind of literary form and the narrative structure and the sort of story beats that you'd get in a thriller. That was new territory for me. But fun, fast, light was for me a kind of a way to get some medicine after pumping out that 3-book series.
And of course, no tale of espionage would be complete without cool gadgets and tech. And there's some fun stuff in this book. So where did you look to draw inspiration for those things? I mean, what about the tech element was fun to write? And how did you go about not just going after kind of classic tropes that we've already seen in James Bond and whatnot?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I don't know. You know, it's the gadgets came largely out of the necessity of what the scene and the situation needed, which was interesting. Like, I didn't go in and say, oh, I invented this cool gadget, now I got to find a place to put it in the story. I actually ended up with a story in a situation where I would have a note like, use secret gadget here. And it was like, okay, well, you know, what is a disadvantage that the main character has? And how can I, you know, include that in this scene to help the main character get the job done? And so that's kind of how I think that the actual gadgets came into being. And it, you know, a lot of it is based off of that Q, you know, kind of Q, you know, inventive kind of character and staff member at like an MI6, right, who has these incredible gadgets that they provide to the secret agents. But it was really about serving the scene and the situation. And then it was sort of just coming up with a way of how can I overcome an obstacle by inventing something that really isn't possible, but will be possible through this cool gadget.
Here's a great follow-up question to that from Robin in the audience. What piece of tech from the book would you love to have? And what piece of tech from the book would you be afraid of existing in our world?
Oh, the one that I would probably love to have, even though it wouldn't be overly practical unless I was going to a very exclusive event and wanted to dress quite elegantly, is there's a backdrop necklace that that one of the secret agents wears, and it has 2 functions. I don't want to spoil too much, but one of them is it has a camera so that the person can have eyes in the back of their head, and it's connected to a little contact lens that shows the field of view behind them in their left eye. I think that would be super practical to have in a lot of circumstances. And then it has a fail-safe weaponized component that I won't spoil. That is a secondary aspect of it too, which makes it also great for a tight situation when you need to escape. So that was a really cool gadget, and I really enjoyed that. The other one, I guess, that I would be afraid of Oh, I don't really know. I'd have to think about that one a lot. But I will say it's not so much a gadget, but I did include an amphibious vehicle. And I just wanted to say that ever since I've been a little kid, I have loved amphibious vehicles. Like I've always liked these little toys where, you know, you can push the toy across the land and then you can put it in the water and it floats like a boat. And I just absolutely love those kind of wonderful things. And, you know, it harkens back to like the famous Lotus from The Spy Who Loved Me, where James Bond, you know, drives off of the dock and into the water, and it goes underwater and turns into a submarine. And I just love that kind of transformative quality with tech and things like that. So those are two examples. I didn't answer the one that scares me so much, but those are two things that I really did like and enjoyed writing.
So one of the villains in the book, without trying to give too much away, is essentially a game designer. And I know as part of your research for this book, you did some gaming.
Yep.
Is this something, has gaming been a part of your life from before? Was this a new introduction because of the book? If so, what sort of relationship did it reestablish? And how did current game design affect what your villain was doing in the book?
Yeah, so I haven't been, it's funny that Robin's in the audience because Robin and I chat about games. So I'm not a person who has a long history of gaming, actually. You know, I'm old enough that when I was a little kid, a couple of things really stand out to me. One of them is my mother took me to a bar when Space Invaders came out, which was one of the first actual, you know, like old school quarter video games, and took me to a bar and sat me down at this thing that I'd never seen before. And I played Space Invaders, and it was an amazing experience. I still remember it to this day. But, you know, I had the Pong and the Atari, but then I stopped playing video games. And so I'm very new coming back to video games, but I got as a gift from my brother a Oculus VR system a couple of years ago. And that was really my reintroduction to games. And that Oculus system is the direct inspiration for the inclusion of a kind of VR and also a little augmented reality that comes into play in the book. That kind of forms like almost like a metaverse in like a snow crash kind of a way. And it was that Oculus system that really, where you just put these goggles on, and I was literally just transformed to another place. And I was mesmerized at how quickly my mind accepted the shift of information that was given to me through the Oculus unit. And I was just really taken in by that. And that led me to really create this idea of, you know, we often think of the virtual space as either liberatory and a really fun place for entertainment. And we also think about cyberspace as something that can be occupied and that can become oppressive and deceptive. But I really wanted to kind of push the boundary of virtual reality to the idea of the boundary between the tangible and physical and the virtual collapse or become threatened to collapse, and make that really the issue. And something that could be a wonderful transcendent experience for a galactic civilization, but unfortunately it's put in the hands of a criminal mastermind. And so the intention of the collapse of the virtual and the physical is unfortunately cast with really, right, like a sinister plan. But normal video games, you know, I've been playing a lot of video games now. I got a PS4 and now I'm like really sucked in. But that happened largely after I'd finished Stellar Instincts, so those didn't really play into that. But I'm hooked.
Going from Pong,
whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but I'm hooked.
Going from Pong to the Oculus is quite a leap.
I know, it's pathetic, isn't it?
You've dated yourself a little bit there, but don't worry, my first game was also Pong. So
awesome. Okay, we are in company. It is quite a leap from like Pong and Atari to the Oculus. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's they're not even in the same league, really. I used the Oculus recently, and it's quite impressive. You know, I was busy bumping into my friend's wall while I was on a Star Wars cockpit, but it is pretty cool. I was gonna get one until I found out Facebook bought it, and then I was like, okay, I'm creeped out now.
Yeah.
But So another thing that was included in this book, and last time you were on the program, we talked a little bit about this, and before you had a great reluctance, maybe not a great reluctance, but a reluctance to write alien species
Yes.
into your novels, and
Yes.
you included aliens in Stellar Instinct. What was the shift in this? What challenges came with it? And has writing a novel that does include aliens inspired you to keep going with that? What are your feelings now after having done it, and the reluctance to do it in your original trilogy?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't know that it was a reluctance to do it in the first trilogy. I don't know that I consciously avoided it. I think that I just conjured a secondary worlds in another part of the galaxy that I just envisioned as being solely inhabited by humans, I think, in that one. And I've always been someone who hasn't really sort of conjured imaginative characters that are non-human. But I took your challenge, which was, by the way, you challenged me to kind of, think about and write alien species. And it was interesting, and it was really fun to do the more I thought about it. And it provided a lot of opportunities to expand on behavior and cognitive potentials and functions and physical capabilities through different anatomies that I really enjoyed. And I liked that a lot. I thought that that was really interesting, what the potential was there with the different alien species. I think I probably most enjoyed the human variants that I created. And that was probably somehow connected back to Dungeons and Dragons and, thinking about the human variant. But that was really interesting. So there's a kind of like an amphibian, cold-blooded version of a human being, which has an extra couple of sets of knuckles on its digits, but has some skin slime that if you touch it, as a regular human, you'll have, gastrointestinal issues for weeks. But they're very interesting. I enjoyed that in the Geshti. I think I really enjoyed the abstracting, I guess, the more traditional human anatomy and sort of, like a human, I guess, human physical and brain function. I thought that was really interesting. I'm still new to I'm going to create an entirely new alien entity. And I think I'm just sort of getting my engine warmed up there. And I do want to keep doing it, though, as I go forward. I do think I will keep doing it.
I hope so, because you're actually good at it. Not everyone is. So through all your 4 novels that I've read, you're an expert world builder. And I've got a 2-part question here for you. How did the inclusion of alien species and variant humans affect the way you had to deal with world building because of the interplay between ecology and how species evolve? And the second part of that question is, going from an epic space opera trilogy to a standalone spy-fi, what differences came about in world building? Was that different? And was it more challenging in one scenario versus another?
Yeah. I'm going to do the second one first, just because it immediately popped into mind. So with the second one, the difference between writing like a three book series that's a space opera versus a standalone thriller with the world building. So what was wonderful about the 3-book series was I laid the groundwork in the first book, I felt like, and I really felt like in the second book of that series, there was the opportunity to really now embellish and dig in on the kind of opening of world building that I did in the first book. And so it was like, if I had described a kind of a particular ecology on a planet and some of the ways in which food and language worked there, I had the opportunity in the second book to now really go in and get more into the details and enrich that cultural part of the world building. And by the third book, the complexity was just wonderful to be able to have different cultures and different languages and the ways in which these things shaped who was compatible and where there was tension and conflict. And that was great. And I felt like I had all the room in the world in the space opera to do what I wanted to do and to have those tangents and digressions. In the standalone, a lot of the world building had to be very lean and almost in a way take a back burner to the pacing of the thriller plotline. And that was hard. Because there were a lot of times where I caught myself, like, I'd introduce a new planetary setting and I immediately, my world building sort of, energy just ramped up through the roof. And it was like, oh, I want to talk all about the landscape. I want to talk all about this ecology. I want to talk about, right, the food in this place. And it was like my thriller writer for this book came over and was like, like bare minimum, you just need to give the reader enough so that they can run with it, and you got to get back to the plot. And so that was a lot of compromise, which was very different. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot writing a thriller. I feel like I'm a much better writer having written a thriller. And I feel like if I go back to a space opera, I will be more mindful of overwriting. Not exposition so much, but even just overwriting and thinking about being as lean as possible while trying to provide as much world building information for the reader. So it was very different in the standalone, and I definitely had to pull back a lot and let the plot shine.
And back to the first part of that question, did you find that with alien species changed the process of world building?
Oh. Not too much. I think that the world that I created was, because it was, I guess, again, a thriller, and I didn't get into too much detail. I didn't have to worry too much about the long histories and the kind of development that led up to the galactic civilization in the way it's presented in the book. And I also chose to create a integrated galactic civilization that only just makes passing reference to times in the past where things were maybe more divisive and more fractured. But I left it there. So because of that, I didn't really need to deal with a lot of that political stuff or that, cultural history. And it was sort of like, we're here now and everyone's kind of dispersed throughout the galaxy. So this is the condition under which the story is going to take place. It was just like a little drop of spice here and there, like with the Gej tea dropping in there that, like for thousands of years ago, that they lived on a planet with really no light. And that was why they have this milky translucent skin, because they don't really have to worry. It's like those creatures, you would see those creatures that live largely in darkness. I kind of pictured them as human variants as having that quality, but I just kind of teased that out.
And here's a question from Sabrina in the audience. Hey, Sabrina. Would you ever write an alien main character?
Oh my gosh, everyone, such pressure with the aliens. I mean, of course, I wouldn't rule it out, right? It's a fascinating idea. It feels a little bit, uncomfortable for me to think about that. Excuse me, I think it would take a lot of research and a lot of reading. But I would want to do a lot of reading to really think up on that. I mean, I've been reading a lot of books lately that have a lot of multi-species in them. Right now, I'm reading Cat Rambo's You Sexy Thing, which has some really great alien species in it. And thinking about the potentials for that and some of the really fascinating things that authors do beyond even just sort of the anatomy, but like how they think about the intellectual components of a kind of cognitive functioning of alien species really fascinates me, and I want to look more into that.
So much to my delight, as a poet, your main character is a poet. And this is very contrary to the stereotype of a secret agent. Typically we see secret agents as these hard-nosed, roughneck types. And yours is a fairly sensitive poet. This is quite a juxtaposition to the stereotype. Why did you make those kind of decisions and the inclusion of poetry in general into a novel, which is fairly uncommon?
I'm so glad that you noticed that and brought that up, because that was very intentional on my part. One of the things that I was worried about was writing a secret agent storyline that really leans towards the kind of spectacularized, right, high action secret agent thriller. Not so much that kind of like nitty gritty, mystery intrigue, like a John le Carre book or something, really, that's all about the clues and following these trails and what does this person really mean. I took more of the approach of like the spectacular action adventure. And what bothered me about that is it's really a flat character arc that, like a superhero, you have this person who already has for the most part, the skills and the talents. So they're not going to develop over as an arc over the story and get what they need to do the job. They're sort of already really good at doing the job. It's just, you got to put obstacles in front of them. And I didn't feel like that was enough. And so I wanted to sort of have an undercurrent above that main conflict, which was more of a personal character arc for Lilene. And so that's where the poetry really came into play. It was like, you're going to be really good at saving the galaxy, but you're going to be really bad at writing poetry. And, that made it easy on me because I could write crappy poetry and not have to worry about trying to write good poetry because it was supposed to suck. And, I wanted her to have this like, damn it, I want to be like a published poet. And, I want people to like my poetry. But I'm having problems, right? And I'm like, I'm not doing a good job at it. And so it opened up this wonderful kind of secondary character arc that eventually integrated its way into the main arc in a wonderful way. And the two kind of came together. And it turned out, her desire to find her voice really became an important component of not just becoming satisfied with her own literary art, but became part of what she needed to have, really, without spoilers, to kind of to accomplish what she needed to accomplish on the job. And the two kind of crossed over in a really nice way. And then about poetry, yeah, I don't know, it just kind of, I've been reading Arkady Martine's books, and, there's some poetry in there and some wonderful like literary art form in that series. And it was on my mind, and I just started throwing it in there, and it became a really fun kind of a little way of adding, again, a kind of a lightness here and there. There's a scene, without spoiling too much, but I know you brought this up to me that you like this scene. There's a scene where she's submitting stuff and getting rejected, and the kind of rejections come in at very inopportune moments. And like I was laughing and having fun with that, and it was a good time. And she kind of gets inspired to write poetry at the strangest moments, and I found that a lot of fun.
That scene was particularly hilarious, and every writer, including those in the audience, know rejections never come at an appropriate time.
I know, and I really enjoyed being able to vent a little bit, like with even the language that was used in the rejection, like poetry is subjective, like, and just be aware that this is just our, and it was kind of nice to kind of be able to kind of let that out a little bit too, which was fun.
And I loved that she was inspired, to write poetry at inopportune times as well. That made those scenes quite a bit of fun. So speaking of poetry, this is very much a multi-genre novel. You've got aspects of poetics, you have the spy aspect, you have the space opera aspect, and some aspects of just real classic science fiction. What were the fun parts of doing a multi-genre book, and what were the parts that were challenging to handle in that way, knowing that you're kind of splitting audiences, because genre is more about audience and marketing than it is so much about the writing process. So what things came up for you in that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the one hand, the beauty about being self-published is you kind of don't have to give a damn about some of that stuff, which is kind of great. And it's like, I'm just going to write a spy story that's going to be set in space, and and you just kind of do it. And you put the two together, and they sandwich together in ways that works or in ways that don't. And so I mean, space thrillers, that's kind of something that you could fall into fairly easily. I think the hardest thing for me was actually the cosmic horror, was bringing in a little bit of the entity of cosmic horror. That's where things got hard for me to negotiate, because I've never written something, I write soft science fiction, but I've never really written something that I think crossed a threshold into what might qualify as a kind of cosmic horror, or even maybe supernatural. And it borders on the edge of that and kind of dips its toe into that. And that was new for me and a little bit hard to negotiate, because it was like, how far do I want to go to ride a line where this comes across as science fiction and in this setting, in this context, feels possible, right? In a way that's explainable, and yet extra dimensional and expansive, but yet explainable, versus crossing over into the fantastical. And I think that's where I struggled most, more than putting the thriller together, or even the spy secret agent together with the space opera. That integrated fairly well. It was more that cosmic horror component, and like, how far do you go? Where's that line where your enemy, right, or your threat, or whatever this thing is a monster, right, or an entity that presents itself as a mystery but doesn't roll over into the fantastical. That's where I struggle, I think, finding that line. Does that make sense? I don't know, but
that does. And I'm interested to hear you say that because for me, a lot of what works in cosmic horror and horror in general is the implication that takes place off the page. And having read your space opera trilogy, you're absolutely expert at implying histories and past to the reader. And horror seems very much about what's left out and implied. So it seems to me that you wouldn't have had trouble with that. And the vagueness of this entity that you're referring to in the book is quite interesting. It's one of those parts that keeps you guessing. Where I guess perhaps it's the implication is used in a different direction. But you're quite expert at the implication, and I didn't feel any difficulty with that character, if that's the right thing to call it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with me, that idea of like, believability. I wanted to create something that was cosmically expansive, right? And of a higher reality, but I didn't want it to lean over into the unbelievable. And that was that hard line to ride. Yeah.
So in your earlier books, you used Greek references to particular plays and stuff as inspirations for the plot. In this book, was there any templates that you brought in to help you guide along the plot, or was did you throw the Greeks out and start from scratch on this one?
I definitely threw the Greeks out, but I think the main templates that I used for this was, without question, the secret agent tropes, especially a British tradition of secret agents. And I laid into the tropes. I mean, I that's part of what I wanted to do, was I wanted to go all in and have fun, because there is a kind of a structure, I feel like, right, and a predictability that goes into particularly secret agent stories, right? Like those are different for me than spy stories, espionage thrillers. Those are, like, for me, they're a whole different entity. But the secret agent one particularly has a kind of a template. And I think that, you've got some things in there that have to happen, and that you expect to happen in certain places. And you have to have this kind of, oftentimes, this villain who is some sort of mastermind, who has this devious plot, right, that in some way involves some form of excess on their part. That all these villains in a lot of secret agent stories, they have a fatal flaw that is some form of obsession. And I really enjoyed that. And that was like a template. I watched a lot of secret agent stories. I particularly became smitten with some things like, Atomic Blonde, I really liked a lot. But, like the books by Trevanian, there's a series by Trevanian, Shibumi is one. Shibumi is an interesting book too, because it pops up in a lot of recent movies in cameos. The John Wick movies have it. Atomic Blonde has it in cameos. The recent one that came out this past year with Brad Pitt trying to think of what it is. Runaway, I can't remember the name of it. This most recent movie has it, but these kinds of ideas of like, you know, the going up against these masterminds who are toying with you, feel themselves so arrogantly, you know, better than everyone else that, you know, they can invite you in and, you know, like show you their world of you know, what they envision in the future, and not worry about you threatening them because they're just so brilliant, right, or so powerful. And so right, so those kinds of templates I think were important for me. That and the obviously the ticking clock, right, the ticking clock, the crucible, putting the character through the crucible, these kinds of, I guess, standard thriller templates were where I went. So not a Greek origin, not a particular cultural text or reference, more just this kind of tradition of the secret agent adventures.
So as an indie author, this is a unique situation for a lot of writers. You are more than a writer because of having to produce the book. Obviously, you know, you're working with but just like traditional writers, you're working with editors, cover artists, audiobook narrators, and so forth. That, you know, there is a team behind the book, even though it's self-published. Can you tell us about this process? How this is differed than working with indie presses for you?
Yeah.
And just the relevance of various team members along the way for this.
Yeah. So my first experience was working with an indie press, and in that case, for the most part, you know, you're writing and you're submitting to the press, and then after that, the editing, the formatting of the book, the cover, all of that is taking place really just kind of with consultation, and you're kind of relieved of a lot of that. You also are then out of the loop with a lot of that stuff too, oftentimes. So there's that kind of, you know, there's a give and take there. And that's very different. But in this case, you really do have total control. And you can kind of gravitate towards and find people who you want to work with you so that you get something done that represents something the way you want it. And it does take a village, without a doubt. I mean, you know, first you've got people like your betas, who, you know, you have to recognize your beta readers, especially your early beta readers, right? Beta readers who are, you know, godsends because they read your half-baked texts and the ones in the crudest form. So first generation betas, second generation betas, your final betas. Then you're going to a copy editor. Then you're going to your editors. So like Jonathan Oliver, I've worked with for a long time. He's been an editor. Actually, I had him edit my books that came out through the indie press. I just also had him edit them because he was doing structural edits and developmental edits for me as a science fiction editor, and I really valued his opinion. And he's copy edited this one. Luke Tarzian, who's another indie author, an awesome indie author, also is an artist. And he did the formatting for me, and I was able to work with him. I actually went and found a font artist who created the very cool kind of spy-fi looking font. And it was called Spy Agency. And there was like 5 different types. And I was like, that is exactly the vibe that I want for this book. And so, you know, I said to him, I'd like to use this. And, you know, I just gave him a donation basically. And he was thrilled. And so I was able to seek out that particular font to kind of get that mood in there. And then same thing too, looking and finding someone who's going to do the art for you. Cheska Sunit was an artist who I found who really just did a great job on the cover. And then Faye Lane did the book design. So it was like a whole bunch of different people coming together in collaboration to make it happen. And that's a fun process, I will say, as an indie author. I enjoy it a lot. I like knowing that I have an ability to kind of have the control of the vision for the outward facing component of the book. And that's really nice. And I love working with fellow creatives. I find that it's exciting, and if you communicate well, that both parties get really into it and really get invested and get really excited at what the final result is. The audiobook is coming out soon. and we're about halfway, maybe like halfway through right now. And that's been super fun too, to have conversations with the narrator and to really, dig into the characters and the kinds of voices that you want for people and things like that is really a lot of fun.
It's certainly always an interesting process to hear your characters in someone else's voice.
Oh,
the amount
absolutely.
of interpretation that goes on working within a team. So back to writing for a second. Over the last few years, you've written a lot of books. And I'm just curious about how you manage your workflow for this, because also as an academic, you also have a lot of academic writing that needs to be done. And as a teacher, I imagine there's quite a bit of prep work for that. So how do you go about managing your workflow? And I mean, from the outside, you seem to have this inexhaustible stamina for the novel. But what does that look like at home?
That's good that it looks that way. Yeah, I have a rhythm now, I think, that I've found. But I will say that, the other ones, the first one was written, slowly, but the second two in the Windtide series were written under contract. And I think that the contract worked well to give me really the kick in the butt I needed to write, because it was like, oh my gosh, I have a deadline. And I think that being an academic and having tackled large scale writing projects in the past worked to my advantage in terms of realizing, like, here's my deadline, here's how my method that I'm going to need to do to get this thing done in time. And that didn't stop me from getting stuck in the end of Act 2 in books 2 and 3, which I always get stuck in the end of Act 2 and go through a grueling period before I can finish writing the book. But the contract, I think, really helped get those two done. And after that, this one was really, I think, just came on the coattails of that other series. And I think I was just kind of in that, when you go, like, if you go on vacation, you go and like the first 2 days, you're kind of like, you're still kind of in, regular life mode. And, it takes like a couple of days, right, to actually kind of like let go and settle. And I feel like Stellar Instinct was kind of like, okay, I finished publishing that third book. I got to write another book now. And it was kind of like still just moving forward. And I don't think I've paused enough to get into that relaxed period yet, per se. And so that's really how I've negotiated it. And in terms of the other work in the job, I do have the privilege of having summers off. And when I say off, right, as an academic, you're doing research and you're writing. So you are working, but I'm not actually reporting to the college and teaching. So I've set up a nice rhythm where over the winter break, I do plotting and drafting and thinking, and I continue to plot and draft on and off when I have time during the spring semester. And then I really hunker down in that summer and try to write and finish, hopefully, a first draft by the time the next semester starts. And then I can edit and I can revise during the school year, but I can't write really very, very productively. But yeah, it's been a run, that's for sure.
So I also wanted to ask you, I know a lot of young writers feel extremely pressured to get the work done. And if I understand it correctly, you didn't start writing science fiction until well into your 40s. What was the catalyst for you deciding to make this decision? And as someone who is older starting to write, I mean, what differences do you think came up for you in that way versus someone who's maybe coming into it with less life experience, but still a passion for writing?
I need like a skull on my desk that I could grab right now and hold up as like a memento mori, right? Like that's a motivation, I will say, right? It's like, seriously, I mean, let me start so why did I start writing this? I had a couple false starts. I had a couple early, probably in my 30s. I'm going to write a fantasy novel. I'm going to write a science fiction novel, and dabbled here or there with a scene or two, but it never really went anywhere. And it wasn't until a friend of mine wrote a YA fantasy novel, and I read that fantasy novel for them. that inspired me to give it a go. And so it was really reading a friend who did this and being like, you just wrote a book. Damn, like, I think I could write a book, right? You know, and it was kind of like, that was really my impetus for it. And I've always been that kind of person. My wife will tell everyone, you know, when I see things, I'm not very good at just watching other people doing them. I don't know what this is with me, but like, I want to do it. And this can have really bad consequences because, like, you know, I'll pick up things like I want to learn to play cello. This person in the park's playing cello, and I'll walk by them on the way to work one day and I'll be like, oh my gosh, that sounds so amazing. I want to play cello. Next thing you know, I'm like trying to play cello. And like 2 months later, my wife is like, you need to stop trying to play cello. We're banning this one, right? Or like some other thing, and I'll pick it up. So I kind of have that personality. And so when I read that book, it really just got me motivated. And I will say that that the age thing has been a real motivator. Like, I feel like when I've gotten from my late 40s into my 50s, and this probably sounds depressing, but the there's like the first half of life, you know, and you're on fire, and the motor is cranked all the way open, the throttle's open, and it's yeehaw, whatever, you know, you don't care in the world. And I you know, now that I'm 51, it's kind of like, you know, I feel like Virgil's famous phrase of like, you know, death whispers in my ear, you know, live, I am coming, right? And I feel like that whisper is kind of starting to be there for me a little bit. And that's a real kick in the butt to be like, I gotta write while I can. So yeah.
I'm sure there's many more years, so don't feel too
Let's
pressured.
hope so.
We do want more, though.
I know that's a weird thing, but I mean, it is true. I mean, really, it is kind of like, you know, just an awareness that like there is a limited amount of time. Gotta do it while you can.
It's an interesting one too, because I think a lot of, you know, as readers, we just assume, oh, writers write their whole lives, but a lot of the writers we're well familiar with didn't even publish until their late 30s or 40s. So it's not an uncommon story, but I think it's very different motivations that lead people to it. So lastly, we have a question from Sabrina in the audience again, and this ties into my last question. What would you most like to write given the opportunity? And my question, what's next for you? What direction are you going to head for your next book? Have you begun? Where are you with that process?
Oh, Sabrina, great question. I'll tell you what I would like to write, but I don't think I'll ever be able to do it. But I would like to first of all, I'd really like to write a space fantasy. I'd like to write a science fiction fantasy, like a true science fiction fantasy. But I have really struggled with magic and with magic systems. And I don't think it's something that is just in my like writing DNA. But I would really like to write that. Yeah, that's funny. She says same. I would really like to write one, but I don't think I can. So that's that kind of that funny answer to that question. And in terms of what's next, so right now I'm taking a deep breath. But I will say that, believe it or not, I have written a opening chapter to another Agent Lelaine Renault story. So I imagine at some point I'll probably write another story, a Gamma Ups adventure, but it'll be another standalone. I wouldn't mind doing on and off a series like that, but I would want it to be like the Bond books where, you know, you don't have to read them in order. You can just pick one up and it's sort of like, you know, another Operation such and such being carried out by Agent Lelaine Renault. But I'm kind of getting the itch, I think, to go back and do something a little bit maybe more complicated and more rigorous and more layered. So I imagine something like that will probably be coming up. There's some ideas in my head that I'm definitely thinking about, but probably remaining in the science fiction genre for sure. I don't see myself deviating from that.
hoping you were going to say a romance thriller is coming next.
Oh my gosh.
I'm teasing, but you seem capable, very capable of shifting from one genre to the other. So
I will tell you, if you have, do we have a minute? I can tell you a funny romance story really quickly. So the funny thing with the romance is, so there is a little like drop of romance in this book, right? In Stellar Instinct. And it really was not even a drop. It was like literally a dab. And my betas sort of got on me about this, and they were like, hello, they were like, you got to give us more than this. And I was like, oh, I just don't know. Romance to me is something I've never written. And I drew it out a little bit with the help of my betas, but it's very funny. That is definitely foreign territory for me.
Well, if you leave the reader wanting it, you got to give it to them, right? So
Exactly.
maybe it's in your future. Thank you so much, Jonathan Nevair. Your wonderful new book, Stellar Instinct. Always love having you on the program. I have a few quick announcements for Space Cowboy. On February 28th, we are going to be interviewing the Apex Magazine editors, Jason Sizemore and Leslie Connor, for their new anthology, which is fantastic. Also, there's a brand new release from Space Cowboy Books coming on February 3rd in both hardback and paperback. It's The Complete Poems 1965 to 2020 from Michael Butterworth, who is an amazing writer, one of my favorites. It's a deep honor to have been able to publish him. Stellar Instinct, you can find all these things at spacecowboybooks.com. Thank you so much, Jonathan. We look forward to anything you've got coming up next, and would always love to have you on the program.
Thanks so much, Jean-Paul. I really appreciate it.